world of deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act. It's the David Knight Show.
As the clock strikes 13, it's Monday, the 9th of March, year of our Lord 2026. Well, it is Iraq deja vu. Not only did we have the lies about weapons of mass destruction, but we also now have an increasing timeline. And you see War Pete saying the same things that Donald Rumsfeld said about the Iraq War at the beginning of it. Same exact stuff. And now we've got Trump channeling George W. Bush, just like the Iraq War. Mission accomplished. I don't need the British to help us. We've already won. Now they want to take credit for helping us? The man is certifiably insane. He wants to set the world on fire, and he has. This has been the plan, if you look at it from the Trump administration, from the very beginning. And as I said from the very beginning, this is going to be worse than the OPEC oil embargo, and it's already shaping up that way. We're over $100 a barrel this morning in terms of price of oil. Where's it headed? Ron said it'll be 200 soon. We'll talk about how that's going to happen. We'll be right back. Well, before we get into the Iraq War, the Iran War, it's hard to tell the difference, isn't it? Before we get into that, let's talk a little bit about some problems that are closer to home. Things that are a result, essentially, of the federal government's war against the American people. And, of course, we're all living with that today. Daylight savings time begins, again, yesterday. And so there's another desperate article hoping that our masters in Washington will allow us to have control over our clocks. Because they're asserting that you have to get permission now from the federal government if you don't want to do daylight savings time. Isn't that amazing? You got 19 states that have already passed legislation saying that if the federal government allows us, we will get off of this and we will pick one or the other. One bill that's just been introduced is going to split it and say we're going to adjust the time by a half hour. And that's a kind of a Solomon compromise there, I guess. But it is an awful thing. Everybody hates it, just like everybody hates Congress and the federal government. But, of course, nobody knows how to do anything about it, apparently. The Senate tried to fast-track its own version last year, only for the effort to be thwarted. Both bills remain in committee as of now. Another recently introduced bill, the Daylight Act of 2026, would make half daylight savings time permanent. Under this legislation, our clocks would jump forward half an hour, and they would lock it there. That has been referred to committee where it may very well die. Why do they want to do this? You know, one of the rationales for this has been, well, we got to do it because of schools and things like that. Well, why don't you adjust the starting time of the school based on different times of the year? Oh, yeah, I know, it's a glorified babysitter. And we can't do that, right? Everything turned upside down for this cursed public fool system that we have. That's why you have the property taxes on your home, so you never own your home. It's the public fool system again. And we're going to talk about that before we get into the Iran war here. Two bills in the House would give states the option to observe year-round daylight savings time. I don't know how it works. I think, wasn't it Arizona that I think is not on it? How did they ever get the permission from the overlords in Washington, D.C.? I mean, forget about the 10th Amendment. Everything, according to Washington, is now prohibited unless they expressly permit it. It's just the opposite of what the 10th Amendment said. The 10th Amendment says you don't have any powers whatsoever unless you were expressly given them. The federal government has now become so anti-constitutional that it has turned that upside down and inverted it to say, you don't have the ability to do anything unless we let you. Everything is prohibited to you. It's whether you're talking about medicine or whether you're talking about setting your clock or whether you're talking about meat processing. We're going to talk about that next here. Wait federal approval to change your clocks. 19 states. I won't read them all out because there's quite a few of them. But again, that's a sizable percentage. So you got 38% of the states want to do this. And then we have something else on the horizon. Remember the Great Taking? We've talked about that. And the trap that has been set for everybody through these UCC codes. And also that was done at the state level. All of these states, instead of filing a bill saying we want to change our clocks if Washington will let us, just say we're changing our clocks to what we want it to be. Forget Washington. And so again, this UCC subterfuge, I'm not pronouncing that right. Anyway, let's just move on. This has been done, and some people pointed out that they have subtly changed from when you've got instruments like stocks and bonds and even deeds in many cases. Instead of you actually owning something, they've changed it so that you are entitled to it, and they make themselves the true owners. And they put you down as just somebody on the list of creditors. And you, by the way, are way down the list of creditors. The stockbrokers and brokerage firms and banks are all going to get paid off before you get paid off. Now, what does that look like? It looks very much like the scam that's been run with paper, gold, and silver. You buy gold or silver ETFs. Typically, the two big ones, GLD and SLV, are out of Shanghai. And so you are buying shares in a corporation. You become, you're entitled to things, but you don't have any actual ownership of the gold or silver. This is what they're doing with everything. And the danger of that has been pointed out by the economist who did the documentary, The Great Taking, which you should watch. The net result of this is that if the system crashes, if we have a major economic crash, which appears to be what Trump is setting up right now, if that happens, then these guys can basically take your shares and not redistribute it. You don't have any right to actually get that out. We're seeing that happening right now. Happened on Friday. BlackRock is telling people they can't get their money out. And Catherine Austin Fitts put out a good tweet on Twitter. She said, "The Great Taking is here. BlackRock just proved it, folks. I've been warning you for years. The central bankers and their trillion-dollar asset managers have engineered a system where they can seize your money at will. It's been called the Great Taking. It's not a theory. It is now unfolding. BlackRock, the world's largest asset manager, just locked up investors' funds in a $26 billion private credit fund. $1.2 billion in redemption requests this quarter, 9% of the pot, and they said no. They capped it at 5%, and they paid out $620 million, and then they blocked the rest of it. So half the people that want to get their money out of BlackRock right now, BlackRock says, no, you're not going to give it to you. And we don't have to give it back to you. And so this is a good example. Blackstone is doing the same thing. People get BlackRock and Blackstone confused, but both of them are doing the same thing, as a matter of fact. Nearly half of the people begging for their money back, trapped. Blackstone's fund saw a record 7.9% redemption surge, and they also jacked up limits, and they dumped $400 million of their own cash just to pretend that everything is fine. And then there's Blue Owl, that is part of the private credit market that's there. They stopped honoring redemptions outright. When the gatekeepers of your wealth start saying no to your own money, remember what I've said Catherine Austin Fitts, liquidity is a myth and their rigged game. Private credit was sold as the safe haven from stocks and bonds, but now it's the trapdoor to total control. They have hollowed out the markets, they've loaded them with derivatives, and now the music is stopping. Guess what? The only chair in the room is going to be physical gold and silver that you have in your possession. Pull back, protect your capital. Get out of funds before the doors slam shut for good. And then she has a plug for how you can find her. And again, she is a financial advisor as well. And I would suggest you take a look at it. It's Catherine Austin Fitts at protonmail.com. She knows her stuff, folks, and she's been on this for a very long time. The DOJ has now released FBI interview summaries containing the sexual allegations against Trump that we had talked about, but now there's more information about it. The Department of So-Called Justice has released FBI interview summaries describing sexual assault allegations involving Trump. The documents were posted online Thursday after members of the House Oversight Committee accused the department of withholding Epstein files related to allegations that Trump sexually abused a minor. Yeah, maybe this has to do a lot with the timing. Wag the dog stuff, right? The files summarize interviews conducted between August and October 2019 with a woman who alleged that Trump assaulted her in the 1980s when she was approximately 13 to 15 years old. You see, after 15 years old, you're considered to be too old for Jeffrey Epstein and Donald Trump. They prefer him young. So the response is some people have been at time to subpoena Trump. It absolutely is. How can they justify interviewing so many of these people when Trump has arguably the most connection to Epstein of anyone? Even more so than Bill Clinton. Yes, he went to the White House a lot. Bill Clinton went to the Epstein's Lolita Express many, many times. I don't know if he went to the island or not, but nevertheless, Trump hung out and partied with the guy for like 10 to 15 years. Why don't you want to talk to him? Well, we all know why. There's two different systems. And so each side will excuse their own guy. They both need to be in prison. Both of them. And folks, this always goes back to why there are these restrictions on statute of limitation laws. I've interviewed the organization SNAP, Survivors Network of Those Abused by Priests and Pastors. Right? But it's also, you could add another P there, politicians. When you look at people like Dennis Hastert, the longest serving Republican Speaker of the House ever. He was a wrestling coach pedophile. What about that qualifies somebody being a wrestling coach? How does that qualify you for being in Congress? I don't know. But anyway, they groomed him for Congress, and then they put him in as Speaker of the House. And he went on with Rush Limbaugh talking about how the paging scandal with the fellow congressman from Texas, or I can't remember his name now. Was it DeLay? Anyway, they just dismissed that as partisan politics from the other side. No, it is what these guys are all about. And they don't want to have the statute of limitations removed. And they never even talked about that with Dennis Hastert. After it was revealed, after the guy that was blackmailing him, the blackmail was revealed because of money laundering charges. And so they came after him with financial crimes, but they never came after him for the pedophile stuff. The judge mentioned that as part of the sentencing. And yet the simplest thing in the world would be for them to get rid of the statute of limitations. They keep that there for a reason, to protect themselves. So Epstein took this young girl off the island, according to the interviews. She was introduced to everyone with money. Money, money, she said. And so she was introduced to somebody that was going to have a lot of it, they said. And it turned out to be Trump. Epstein was there with others, to include Trump, in a very tall building, she said, with huge rooms. I won't go into the details of the allegation, but just suffice to say, as part of this, and this is one of the things I think is significant, as part of this, she told investigators she had heard conversations between Epstein and Trump about blackmail. Epstein talked about blackmailing people in front of, they redacted that. She was confident that Trump knew Epstein blackmailed people because she heard Epstein and Trump talking about it. She described how Epstein blackmailed her mother with compromising images, which she said ruined my family. And she said she knew that Trump had illegal building permits. She heard him talking about washing money through casinos. That's what the casinos were for. You see, when organized, Trump is a mafia boss. He's a mafia don. And they would open up these small businesses, and they didn't care if they made money or not. They were cash businesses, and they just wanted to launder money that they had from other illegal things that were paying them a lot more money. And by the way, if the business goes out of business, that's maybe even better for them because now they got an additional write-off, so they don't have to pay taxes. That's what was really going on with Trump's casino stuff. I think he was also a doofus who couldn't he couldn't make money with a casino even if he wanted to. But that was a big part of it, the money laundering through the casinos. And of course, the blackmail stuff that's happening. Remember, there was also the testimony of another victim who said, yeah, they would bring us in and they would blackmail us and tell us, you're not getting out of here unless you bring some more girls in. So they bring them in, they maneuver them into a particular compromising position, take pictures of it, and then use that to keep them there and essentially keep them enslaved, blackmailed with what they have already taken pictures of. She vaguely remembered other girls around older men, but she did not recognize anyone. Two of the men, she said, were fat and disgusting and had Santa stomachs. But anyway, she said she believed Epstein's associates continued to monitor her for years. She asked the agents if they could keep her safe, saying, throughout my life, Epstein's people have found me and kept tabs on me. In one interview, she told investigators she'd been working with attorneys, said she wanted to disclose that in case it created a conflict with the federal investigation. She also reported receiving threatening phone calls. She said if it wasn't Epstein, maybe it was the other one, meaning Trump, because the two of them worked as a team for a decade or better. Meanwhile, the response from Caroline Levitt is to blame the victim. She said this is from a sadly disturbed woman who has an extensive criminal history. Well, how do they know who she is? Her name has been redacted, and that's exactly the point that the New American makes in this article. They said the problem with all of this is that since this person's name is not out there, they can claim anything that they want about her. Who's to check that? Nobody knows who this is. So they could say anything that they want to about this woman. We don't even know if she's alive. So decades old sexual abuse cases. They said the problem is, and this is the other defense that Caroline Levitt had. First, she attacked the victim, which is, we don't know who this is even. And then the other thing she said was, all this information was there during the Biden administration. So if Trump had been guilty of anything, don't you think the Biden people who hate him would have prosecuted him? And they point out, well, first of all, in a decades-old case like this, it's hard for you to get a prosecution. It doesn't, not prosecuting somebody doesn't mean that they're not guilty. It just means that you have an impossible case. What they don't even mention here in the New American is the statute of limitations. But this is the argument. What they do mention is the argument that we have said all along about getting rid of the statute of limitations. Look, the problem with the pedophile issue, the kids are shamed, embarrassed. They don't understand what's happening, and they don't want to talk about it, obviously. And so they don't usually come to grips with what's going on until they're adults. By that time, so much time has passed that it's hard, even if you didn't have the statute of limitations, it's hard for them to produce the evidence and the witnesses or whatever they need in order to get this. By that time, it's a cold case. And so even if they got rid of the statute of limitations, it'd be difficult to come after most of these pedophiles unless you catch them red-handed. And they just caught a guy that was doing that, by the way. There was a kid who, I forget now the details, I saw it over the weekend. The kid did something and spilled something all over him. And so mother took him in the bathroom, and maybe it wasn't spilling, maybe it's a bladder accident or something. Took him in the bathroom and said, you lock the door, and you don't come in unless you hear, don't let anybody in, don't open this door for anybody unless you hear a special knock. And she did the knock. This pedophile heard that, and he then came in and did this secret knock, right? And the kid opens the door, and he comes after the kid. Kid screamed his head off, or her head off, I don't know if male or female, and brought help. The guy got away, but then they found him. But unless it is something's happening right then and there like that, you typically don't find these people. How are you ever going to prove this decades after the fact? But they keep the statute of limitations there so that this doesn't happen. That argument from Caroline Leavitt was so incredibly dishonest. First of all, it doesn't mean that he is innocent simply because he's protected by statute of limitations and they don't have sufficient evidence to corroborate this. The White House response also leans heavily on disparaging the accuser because we don't know who she is. They can say anything about her. And this is the way that they always respond. I mean, this is what you see with Pam Bondi when she is questioned by the Senate. She goes on offense and she starts attacking all of them personally. The record reinforces the perception of a two-tier justice system. Ordinary offenders face aggressive prosecution, but political and financial elites often stay untouched, even when the alleged crimes are severe, as we see. The documents released so far in the Epstein archive only deepen those concerns. They show the convicted trafficker collaborating and communicating with powerful figures across business, politics, and finance. Among the names appearing repeatedly is Donald Trump. 38,000 times, as a matter of fact. How could they not bring him in to testify? Well, they don't do too much of anything, do they? Senate Democrats, by the way, are now introducing a bill to break up major meatpacking companies. And we have a monopoly on meatpacking. And that, I think, is a part of why meat prices are going up. Yes, there's other issues involved. There's a confluence of several different things, but this is one factor. And we don't want to have a monopoly of meatpacking. So what do? Do we have a law like this? As a matter of fact, this is the wrong solution to a problem that was really created by the federal government. If you look at their rules and regulations, as we saw in the case of Amos Miller, the Amish farmer in Pennsylvania, in that particular case, it wasn't just the federal USDA, but it's also the state Department of Agriculture there in Pennsylvania, coming after him because he raised cattle, did grass-fed cattle on his farm, natural cattle, and he wanted to naturally process them. He started doing this because during COVID and Trump's chaos and lockdown that he did, it created all kinds of issues with the meatpacking industry, and they were backed up. And he couldn't get his cattle to the meat packers. And so he started selling it, butchering it himself, and selling it naturally done. And they came after him for doing that. That started during COVID, but you should be able to raise your own cattle, butcher them, and sell the meat. That's just ordinary. And of course, the issue in the aftermath of Amos Miller, you had Thomas Massey, who's a farmer himself, introduced a bill to stop the USDA requiring people to send them to these meat packers, because part of that, and one of the reasons why Amos Miller doing his own butchering was a big plus for the consumers. The cattle were not sent to feedlots to be fattened up. They were still fed on grass until they were processed. And so Thomas Massey has put forward a bill years ago when all this stuff happened. And actually, Frank Nicely here in Tennessee, who's now passed on, was also working on the same type of thing. That's the solution. We need less federal regulation, because it's the federal regulations that have caused us to have this bottleneck monopoly that is there, the meatpacking industry. Family, Grocery, and Farmer Relief Act would make it illegal for a major meatpacking company to control more than one type of meat. So now we're going to have more centralized rules, right? So the bill would also bar foreign-controlled meatpacking companies, including Brazil-based JBS, from operating in the United States. Chuck Schumer framed the legislation as a direct response to rising grocery costs, citing federal data showing a 16% increase in beef prices over the past year. He said this pernicious stranglehold of the meatpacking monopoly, he doesn't finish the sentence the way I would say, is really a symptom of pernicious stranglehold of the USDA. That's what enabled this. So you've got a lot of Democrats really going in hard on this. And this is what they're going to say, the sole cause of the rise of beef prices, and it's not the sole cause. Currently, 4 companies control 85% of the U.S. beef market, 67% of the pork market, more than 60% of the chicken processing market. According to the White House, its own criticism of the industry. 4 decades ago, the top 4 beef packers controlled about 36% of the market. Now it is 85%. We're seeing consolidation of everything, whether you're talking about media companies or entertainment companies. It was a few years ago we had consolidation of entertainment as well as news into just a handful of companies, about a half dozen. Now even those companies are consolidating. Pretty soon we'll have one news media organization, and they'll be the one that is friendly to Trump. The bill would also bar foreign-controlled meatpacking companies, of course, and they're saying what's going to happen is the people are pushing back against this, the meat processing industry that's pushing back on it. They said what will happen is you'll have the meat sent abroad rather than sold in the United States. And so what they're suggesting, as a matter of fact, Trump himself has already started a Department of Justice investigation into the big 4 meat packers for potential collusion and price fixing. The same people that went from 36% of the market 40 years ago to 85% of the market today. The Small Business Administration would be authorized under this bill to provide loans and technical assistance to farmers, cooperatives, and small businesses looking to acquire divested facilities. Again, the solution is to get rid of the regulations that enable this type of thing and almost require it. A handful of firms dominating beef, pork, and chicken. A rancher, a member of the Ranchers Cattlemen Action Legal Fund, United, a cattle producers trade organization, said it is past time to enforce antitrust laws and to break up the meat monopolies like Congress did in the 1920s. Well, unfortunately, these antitrust regulations typically don't work very well. And usually they are a function of overregulation by the federal government. In the same way that when you go in with restaurant regulation, most of restaurant regulation is supported by the restaurant industry because it is anti-competitive. They don't want new restaurants coming in. So let's make it very difficult for somebody to open up a restaurant. You got to have all new equipment. You can't buy anything used on the market. You got to have all new equipment and other things like that make it difficult for people to come in. And then you wind up, then the natural response with these types of regulations are to be anti-competitive. When you don't have competition, you wind up with monopolies. But the meat industry itself said that there's other issues. The cattle herd, for example, is at its smallest level in 75 years, and that beef packers have recently experienced record losses of more than $350 per head. She questioned the feasibility of forcing divestiture, asking who would have the capital and the expertise to buy and to operate the facilities. Well, you could have the same people operating the facilities. As for the capital, if you had co-ops that were involved in it and small business association giving them loans, that would be part of it. But again, allow people to process their own food. Why not? The ensuing chaos, she said, and likely significant drop in meat production will upset delicate supply and demand forces, ultimately forcing retail and food services to hike consumer prices. So, and it will incentivize them sending their food abroad. Well, here's something else that's food for your mind, and that is education and homeschooling, which is under attack globally. And it will be here as well. You need to understand the subtle ways that it's going to be done. And as a matter of fact, the UN that is leading the fight against homeschooling shows us how it's going to be done. Australian officials right now are targeting homeschooling amid global assault. This is an article of the New American by Alex Newman, and Alex Newman is excellent in terms of his coverage of education globally. That is something that he's really focused on, that and climate change stuff. So I've had him on several times to talk about this. It is a direct attack, actually, on the family by the ayatollahs of the UN and of other governments, including our own. Right now, it's been held at bay for a while. Yet another battlefront in the totalitarian assault against home education and parental rights appears to be opening, this time in Australia. And I like what Scott Shara said in the interview on Friday. He called it the public fool system. I think that's the best. You can keep fooling the public, right? If you can educate the kids from an early age, you can fool all the people all the time. You've got universal education, right? So parents across the nation worldwide are fleeing government schools by the millions. Bureaucrats are working overtime to slam the door shut on one of the last bastions of educational liberty, homeschooling. So the Australian Prime Minister, who is part of a Labour government, openly attacked homeschooling and religious schools as potential threats to what he called deeper social cohesion. You know, we've heard variations of this for the longest time. You know, we'd always hear back in the day when we were doing it, well, what about socialization of the kids? Well, what about when you don't let them get close to each other and you put masks over their faces and you put them inside plastic bubbles at school and all the rest of the stuff, or you force them to stay at home? How does that involve socialization? And what do you mean by socialization? Well, this is out of Australia. The same person who is in charge of being the Minister for International Education is also the person who is in charge of immigration, citizenship, customs, and multicultural affairs. See how these things all work together. And what they're trying to do is to pretend that these Islamic radicalists, just like they just had this recent attack on Bondi Beach, where they had some radical Muslims start targeting people that were Jewish. I think they killed some non-Jews as well, but their main thing was they were coming after Jews. And so they want to put those sins on Christian homeschoolers. It's like, maybe you are the problem with your open borders and immigration and the people that you're letting in. Maybe we don't attack the family, and maybe we don't attack Christian homeschooling because of an Islamic terrorist that you brought in. But that's exactly what these people are doing. They're arguing for social cohesion while they're undermining it with their immigration policies. And it's the same person that is there. Her name is Hill. Her rhetorical attacks on home education, parental rights, and religious liberty and other fundamental freedoms are not happening in isolation, however. It's quickly becoming a global war. And behind all of that is the UN and the UN Educational and Scientific Cultural Organization, UNESCO, right? And at the center of UNESCO, the central thing that focuses all this is the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. Every country on earth, except for the United States, has signed onto that treaty. But even in the United States, you have judges and state governments and the legal system, as well as many and other branches, are acting as if we are a part of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. I've played videos that I did back in 2009 about that many times. And essentially, what they are doing is saying, you know, only the state should be raising the child. It takes a village approach to this. But by talking about the rights of the child, they are using that as a wedge to separate children from parents so that the state can raise them. The same type of thing that we see happening in schools across America under the hubris of the LGBT education saying we're going to stop hatred and bullying and things like that. We are going to enact all this LGBT gaslighting and propaganda without telling the parents, because the children have a right to this or a right to that. And by breaking up the family and going directly to the child does not have rights. The child does not have responsibility. The child needs to be parented. The question is, who's going to parent the child? The state or the actual parents? And that's the issue. It's whose values are going to be taught. That is clearly the issue. And so this person, Hill, is actually a graduate of religious school himself. He says, well, I'm not necessarily opposed to faith-based education. He says he just wants to make sure that there's more government-orchestrated mixing, as he calls it, through sports, extracurricular activities, and social events. Well, let me say, first of all, this person who is now attacking educational freedom, freedom of thought, freedom of religion, all these things are associated when you say that you can only have government schooling. This person says, well, hey, I went to a religious school myself. You should stop and think about that. Is a religious school going to be a vehicle for teaching your values, even if it is your same religion? Will they teach your values, or will they teach the curriculum that the state wants? Because this religious school or this charter school is dependent on money, and they will teach the curriculum that the government requires in order to get that money. You should think about it. That's why I push homeschooling so much. The other thing you should think about is the trap for homeschoolers, and he's laying it right here. And I've seen this. I've talked about this since the 90s. Back in the 90s, when social media was first starting to open up in a very small way, I got on these groups to find out what was happening in the state. And there were people saying, oh, we want to have the government paying for our kids to participate in extracurricular activities, whether it's sports or whether it's band or something like that. And I said, if you do that, it's a trap. And that's the way folks are going to come after you. They are going to come after you with incentives. They'll come after you with fear. They'll say, oh, well, if you don't send your kid to school, how's that kid going to get into college? Well, that argument hasn't aged too well. We can see what a ripoff college has become. And now you got a lot of college graduates who are having difficulty finding jobs, even in engineering. And but long ago, it got to the point where it made no economic sense. And so they'll come after you with fear and insecurity about the future of your children. They will come after you, offering you incentives. This is the way Satan operates. Just understand that and be on guard against that. So in the view of this guy in Australia, Hill, the state has to step in to ensure proper bridging capital, reducing prejudice and resilience against hate-based violence and misinformation. This is the argument through which they push all the LGBT and the critical race theory and all the rest of this stuff. Your child belongs to the village. And I gotta say, it was, we were done with Build-A-Bear. We didn't realize this until we brought and we never did it with the boys, obviously, but I went there to get a doll for her. And we had a special evening plan, trying to get her acclimated to our culture. When we brought her back, she still didn't speak English, really. This is the first Christmas that she was here. So Karen got her all set up in special clothes and everything. And then, really, really nice clothes. And the two of us are going to take her to see the Nutcracker. Yeah, actually, I did that. But I like the music, but I don't like ballet. And I was ruining the decision after we got there. But prior to that, we decided we'd take her to Build-A-Bear and let her do a little doll thing. And as we're sitting there getting the doll, I'm looking up, and it takes a village to build a bear, is what they had written up around the edge of the thing. And it's like, wow, this is what the franchise is all about. That's what they're selling people. And so it's like, never again. Never again we're going to do that. A 2014 study, by the way, shows that Hill is wrong. In fact, says Alex Newman, the researchers found that adults who were homeschooled were actually more tolerant of different people than those who attended government schools. Hill speaks as a key official amid a royal commission on anti-Semitism and social cohesion that was triggered by the Bondi Beach terror attack. And again, you create the problem, you bring the people in that you know are going to be like this, have a terrorist attack, and then you direct the solution against the people you don't like, right? Christians, homeschoolers. So that's what they're doing in Australia. And understand that that's not going to be limited to them either. As Alex Newman points out, the UNESCO report was written by a guy who was a former official from the communist dictatorship of North Korea. He produced a draconian document that puts a target on the back of homeschoolers worldwide. And the document is called Homeschooling Through a Human Rights Lens. And the human rights lens is what they're talking about in terms of the rights of the child, in contradiction to the parental rights. So as he points out, it's important to remember this, Adolf Hitler was the first tyrant to criminalize home education. And it is still under attack in Germany. As a matter of fact, that family of homeschoolers who came here as refugees, genuine refugees, because the German government was going to take their children away from them because they were Christians and homeschooled. And they've been here for like a decade or something. And then the Biden administration decided that of all the people that they'd opened up the borders to and brought in, they were the family that needed to be deported. Truly was amazing, but eye-opening, wasn't it? And fortunately, they fought back against that, and it didn't happen to them. There was an outrage about that selective prosecution of them. And so, again, this is the way these people operate. And it is to come after parental rights. As Alex Newman points out, it's rooted in the Bible, enshrined in the Constitution, and in natural law. All are under siege like never before. Parents everywhere have to recognize this for what it is, a coordinated war on the family. The solution is not compromise or school choice. Those are traps that invite regulation and control by incentivizing it financially. Always understand that's the way Washington operates. They print up their fiat currency and they start passing it out like monopoly money, because that does give them a monopoly of power. It is bold resistance defending homeschool freedoms and supporting independent Christian education and rejecting every scheme that places bureaucrats between parents and their children. Bold resistance is a solution. The future of Western civilization hangs in the balance, says Alex. If parents surrender their God-given right and duty to educate the next generation, they surrender everything. The time to stand is now before the globalist noose tightens further around the necks of free people everywhere. From Germany and now also Sweden and other countries have also bought into this, making only government school legal. As a matter of fact, there's an article from Chris Perrin on one American family's classical education. And he talks about education, he says, is as old as parenting. Education originally came from writing as somebody who's been a part of classical education, all about Latin and Greek and word origins and things like that. We never taught Latin and Greek to the boys. We just went to word origins that came from Latin and Greek, because that's what I thought was the important aspect of it. They don't need to go back and read Plato in the original Greek, but it is interesting from an etymological standpoint to look at the roots of the English language. And once you understand some key words in Latin and Greek and how they are applied across the board to so many different English words, it really does open up your vocabulary. Anyway, education came from the Latin educare or educare, or however you pronounce that. Again, I don't know how to pronounce it. And it was simply meant to raise, to rear, or to bring up. So if we apply that to Deuteronomy 6, it says, raise up your child in the way they should go. What that literally means is educate. Educate your child in the way they should go. And when they're old, they will not depart from it. So it is an imperative for Christians to do this, I believe. Especially when you look at what the schools have become, when you look at the agenda of the schools, when you look at what they have done to children, the gaslighting, the psychological operations, the mutilation that they've done to children. How in the world could you be a part of that? As Alex Newman has said in the past, if you understand what's going on with the schools, you understand they're on fire and you got to get your kid out of there. Then the next thing you do is to put out that fire before it burns down the rest of the community. And that's what the public fool system is. It is a fire that is burning down our society. And that was what it was designed to do. So again, you need to understand that you need to think of that as educate your child in the way they should go. That is your responsibility, your duty to do that. So in this article, what he does is he points out the history of the Addams family. I'm not talking about Lurch and Thing and all the rest of them. No, this is the John Quincy Adams, his son, and his grandson and his great-grandson of John Adams. Looks at it through 4 generations, and he sees how things worked and how they evolved. And of course, at the time of John Adams, everybody was primarily educated at home. Everybody was homeschooled. Some would go on then to a formal education in a school, or they might have a tutor like Thomas Jefferson did and certain things. But that was the way it was with John Adams. He was first homeschooled. Then he went to a grammar school, then a Latin school, then finally to Harvard College. At that time, Harvard only had an enrollment of 100 students. Books were scarce. They were treasured, read deeply. Both John Adams and his son Quincy kept regular journals that testify to sustained, serious reading. In John and Abigail Adams's letters, we see that they were united in their conviction that the purpose of education was moral and intellectual formation, not merely vocational utility. And that is a key issue. I remember hearing a preacher one time talking about how his kids were in kindergarten. And he said years and years ago, at the time he was talking about his kids were grown, and this is before homeschooling or anything. And so he said they went in on a parent-teacher's day, and the kindergarten teacher was saying, well, this is the activity that we're doing, and yada, yada, and goes on all this detail. And he raises his hand, and he said, what's the purpose of this? And he said, like a deer caught in the headlights, well, I don't know what the purpose of it is. It's just activity that we're doing. And, and so it's like, you have to think about the purpose in terms of education. And the Adams did. John Adams and Abigail Adams understood that the purpose of education was to make you a good man. He wrote to John Quincy Adams in 1781. And so he also took him along in the way with him. And as he walked along with him, and he took John Quincy Adams at a very young age. He took him on his travels on diplomatic missions to France and to Europe and things like that. And so John Quincy Adams grew up in that. And then the problem, though, is when you get to the 4th generation, things began to change. It was with Henry Adams that you saw was self-consciously talking about his education and his autobiography, The Education of Henry Adams. He was born in 1838, and he came to believe that he had been educated for the 18th century, but forced to live in the 19th and 20th century. He lived in the progressive era, which increasingly rejected the old liberal education as narrow, formal, and ill-suited to mass immigration and a rapidly industrializing, scientific, and bureaucratic age. So many in his time rejected the old education and determined to reform education as a science rather than a practiced art. And so he says, in the study of the Adams family, we see the American stream of classical and Christian education flowing through John Adams and into his son John Quincy, and then into his grandson Charles Francis. But then in Henry, we witness confusion as the stream meets and blends with a new one that is very fast-flowing. Darwin, the steam engine, the Civil War, the dynamo, all these troubled the waters and muddied them. And you can see them losing their way within 4 generations of the family of Adams. Well, we have to change the topic here to Kristi Noem. I was glad to see her leave. As a matter of fact, the first person to get fired in this criminal Trump regime that has been around for a year. Not that there's a lot of other people that shouldn't be fired, but Matt Labash had a very sarcastic and funny take on all this. And he thought one of the interesting things to see was how MAGA reacted to this. Because first you defend anybody that is around Trump and all of his regime until Trump pushes them out. And then they attack like a pack of dogs, sacrificing the underbosses so that MAGA doesn't have to blame the boss. He says, well, Kristi, we hardly knew you. Actually said, no, we knew you quite well, unfortunately, or at least better than we'd wish to. You were always in our grills with your Mar-a-Lago face, whether it was in a $220 million taxpayer-funded sizzle reels or whether it was your ice Barbie wear, though I was personally partial to your cowgirl outfits because who doesn't like a cabinet secretary who isn't afraid to ride cowgirl, he says. Can anyone even name another DHS secretary off the top of their heads? Can you recall anything about Tom Ridge or Jay Johnson? Probably not. But then those guys didn't purchase 2 Gulfstream G700 private jets for $200 million on the public dime, complete with a luxury master bedroom for mile-high meetings, or they didn't write memoirs proudly featuring anecdotes about shooting their puppy in cold blood in a gravel pit as proof that they can make those tough leadership choices. They didn't hold press conferences defending their troops gunning down protesters in the street as if human beings were untrainable wire hair pointers or something. This week, after Noam became the first Trump cabinet official to get fired out of his second term, and he says you have to be pretty rancid pollutant to get treated out of this cesspool, to get tossed out of it. He said there's already lots of troubling questions about her named successor, Mark Wayne Mullen, a man whose first name can't make up his mind. Mark Wayne. I've never heard anybody named Mark Wayne before, actually. But we did have Kristi Noem and her corruption on full display, as I just mentioned.
Two of them were
That's
chosen.
inaccurate, Madam Secretary. I'll read from the notice from your agency. Given the immediate action to significantly reduce illegal immigration and border crossings, DHS identified 4 companies. 4 of the hundreds of thousands of companies in the United States. You identified 4. One of those is this Safe America Media company. Where is Safe America Media headquartered?
I don't know.
I don't know either, Madam Secretary. We can't find it. We can't find a website. We did find an address that's registered for this company. Do you know where that address is?
Is there a problem with this contract?
I'll
Because
tell you
was
about
done
it.
according to
Madam
law.
Secretary,
It was
the
done by career
address is
officials.
registered to a political
It was
operative.
dollars that were spent
Madam Secretary, the
to
company,
inform
and then I'll
people
give you an
that the
opportunity to
laws-
respond.
Look,
The company is registered to a political operative in Virginia. Do you know, just by way of example, whether this company that received $143 million in taxpayer dollars, has it ever done work for the government before?
I don't know. I can't.
The answer is it has not. And do you know why we know that? Because it was incorporated 8 days. 8 days before this contract went out. You want the American people to believe that this is all above board?
Yes,
that $143 million of taxpayer money just happened to go to this one company that doesn't have a headquarters, doesn't have a website, has never done work for the federal government before, and is registered apparently or attached to a residence from a political operative. And of course, one of the subcontractors of that contract, as you know, is a political firm that's tied to you back when you were governor of South Dakota. The reason why I ask these questions is that this is taxpayer money. And I presume, I don't know this for a fact, but Senator Tillis noted yesterday the way in which your agency is blocking the Inspector General from 11 different investigations that it is trying to conduct. I don't know if this happens to be
11 investigations.
I certainly hope it is, because eventually the facts will become public in this regard. And
Yeah, Trump didn't have a choice but to cut her loose. 11 different investigations that are being blocked. And everybody was on it. Tom Tillis is a Republican. Of course, he's not coming back. He's not kowtowing to the Trump regime. Matt Labosh says, I often find it unintentionally hilarious when after Trump finally throws someone over, like in Noam's case, after several hundred violations of ethics and for good taste, and it's safe to condemn one of their own, the MAGA bots tend to jump on a weakened member of the herd with both hooves, practically salivating for a good culling, as if it knew this person needed elimination all along on faulty character grounds. When a Trumpster relative of mine heard the news of Noam's defenestration being thrown out the window, a relative who has unimpeachable personal morals, but who has made excuses for Trump from everything from his multiple affairs, including a porn star, to invading the Capitol. He's told me, he said, you need to take her to the front of the Capitol and stone her. Oh, okay, he said. Never heard him speak like that about Noam when she was accusing Alex Preddy of domestic terrorism before his dead body even cooled. And then there was Fox's Laura Ingraham, who consistently defended Noam when she was pilloried by the critics, but who is now demanding to know, why didn't Trump fire her right away? Unspoken in all these late-hit criticisms of Noam is that she wasn't picked in spite of being corrupt, but because she signaled all along that she was utterly corruptible. This is the same way they pick somebody like Dennis Hastert. He said, this much of the reason I think MAGA bots now spend more time chewing out each other, clawing at each other's eyes. There's a lot of displaced aggression, like when your boss humiliates you at work, but instead of telling him off and quitting, you go home and you kick the dog. Or you kick Candace Owen. Not that Candace Owen doesn't deserve a good kicking. Sorry, I shouldn't say that about the mentally ill, he says. But except for, say, Nick Fuentes, who has a lot of other problems, like being a Hitler-loving incel for starters, but who actually calls BS on Trump these days, even if he ignored the truth for a decade prior. They're all too cowardly. Here's the key. They're all too cowardly to criticize the king directly. That's exactly what it is. And it's not that they're necessarily even cowardly. It's like Alex Jones realized that's where the money is, right? You sell Trump and you hold him up as some kind of untarnished idol. That's a ticket to a lot of money. And if you criticize him, you don't have to worry just about Trump. It's the MAGA herd that will cull you. I know that personally. So he says, truly enjoying their circular firing squad. They deserve each other, he says. Well, one last article here before we get to the thing that's on everybody's mind, which is what's happening with Iran, and specifically, how is Trump taking us into a global depression at a fast rate? Kari Lake was put in by Trump to be the head of Voice of America. And actually, I thought that was a pretty apt pairing there between that. Somebody who had spent her life as a mainstream media mouthpiece and then jumped on the Trump train and started pushing lies about the election. And so she got into Voice of America and she wanted to fire 500 employees, which I applaud. I don't support the government running media. I don't support the government running propaganda media. And of course, when they created Voice of America, Radio Free Europe, and all these other things, which Tucker Carlson's dad ran, right? Remember, CIA and the background of Tucker Carlson and how he doesn't really have a problem telling you anything, and whether it's true or not, because that's where Daddy was. But you take somebody like Kari Lake, who worked for mainstream media and would tell you the mainstream lies that you're supposed to hear, and then she went from that to currying favor with Trump, telling lies about the election. She was the perfect fit for a propaganda organization. Unfortunately for her, she was appointed as interim head, and she did these actions of firing people, which again, I support completely getting rid of this organization, just like NPR. Because what happens is these organizations, when they created them, they wanted to get assuage everybody's fears that these things would be used domestically. Now, these are only weapons abroad, but we all knew they would be instruments of tyranny at home. And so what they did was they came up with the Smith-Mundt Act, which said you will not do anything domestically. And under Obama, they got rid of that. So that was a real harbinger. So I would like to see the whole thing deep-sixed along with NPR. But she did these actions as the acting CEO of these two organizations. And so now a judge has overthrown all that because she was not able to get the votes in the Senate, just like she was unable to get the votes for governor, but she claimed that it had been stolen. She hasn't made that claim yet about the Senate. She hasn't claimed that the Senate confirmation hearing votes that she lost were stolen, but just wait. Meanwhile, Trump has vowed to block the government on signing new laws unless they pass the Save America Act. We've heard all this before, haven't we? Remember during his grift that culminated in January the 6th, he called his PAC the Save America PAC. Now he's got the Save America Act. And the Save America Pact was an act, just like Stop the Steal was an act. And January the 6th was a trap. And so now he's out there with this Save America Act. What are the aspects of this that are going to fix the election? Well, number one, show voter ID. Good. I'm all for that. Number two, I'm all for this as well. No mail-in ballots except for military or people who are ill or disabled or traveling. That's the way it used to be. That's the way it used to be before Trump locked us down and enabled mail-in balloting for everything. Now you can't show up in person. You had to do vote by mail. And then he had the audacity to claim about the corruption from the new rules that he had created. I always believed that he did that deliberately. I believed that they needed to have a tag team for this massive scam of the pandemic. He didn't want to put all that on just one party. He had to share the responsibility. That way, when people complain about it, they can say, well, yeah, Trump did the vaccine and he locked us down, but it was Biden who mandated the injections and so forth, and he continued the stuff. That's the way MAGA approaches it. So they had to have that handoff, because if one party, one person had done all of it, people would catch on. People are starting to catch on, though, now to what Trump is like, because he is now still doing the same thing. So we're going to talk about what he's doing. Voters oppose Trump on migrant raids and on the early Iran strikes, but they back him on other key issues, things like the borders. So they don't like the way he's enforcing the immigration stuff, but they don't want to have open borders either. That's a false choice that people are given. But I think they're looking at this as a hodgepodge of things because they can't see the pattern. And we're going to show you the pattern when we come back. It's Trump's global chaos. We saw that beginning with the COVID pandemic, but now you're going to see it on steroids with this Iraq war and what he is going to be doing as part of that. We'll take a quick break and we'll be right back.
You're listening to The David Knight Show.
Tell Alexa to add the APS radio skill and have access to the best channels anywhere. From country to blues, classic hits to news, APS Radio curates incredibly diverse playlists for you to enjoy. Get details at apsradio.com.
Welcome back to Is It War? World War I.
War.
Correct. World War II.
War.
Correct. The Vietnam War.
War.
Oh, I'm sorry, Carl. That was a congressionally authorized counteroffensive. Don't worry, we get right back on track with the Korean War.
War.
No, that was police action.
No, they had tanks and stuff.
Well, the police have tanks now, don't they, Carl? Okay, the First and Second Iraq War.
War.
They identify as military action. It's a bit like pronouns, except we kill people. All right, how about Libya?
War.
I'm sorry, that was kinetic action, not a war. Venezuela.
Well, it was an act of war, I think.
No, I'm sorry, that was a law enforcement operation, not a war. Iran.
It's a war. We're doing war things.
No, not war things. Preemptive retaliatory de-escalation action.
No, that's not a thing.
All right, judges? Okay, how about the war on terrorism?
War.
No, it was a coalition-led conditional operation. How about Afghanistan?
Afghanistan was the war on terror.
No, I'm sorry, that was a pre-authorized defense stabilization initiative.
Okay, can somebody tell me the rules here?
War on poverty, Carl.
poverty. That's not even
I'm
a thing.
sorry,
we
I
can-
hate to do this to you. It was a trick question. We don't have poverty in the United States. The Dow went up to 50,000. Couldn't even get that high. Amazing. Don't even worry about the Epstein files. War on Christmas.
The coffee cup thing? No, that's not a war.
There's a war for the soul of the nation and whether or not I can wish my children Merry Christmas.
Okay, you know what? I quit. I don't want to do this anymore.
Today's magical phrase, Carl, you just became a United States Congressman. Congratulations, Representative Carl. Merry Christmas.
It's March.
Well, okay, happy Hanukkah.
Some of the best parodies I've seen of any of this stuff. Yeah, it's is it war? And of course, I love the one about Iran. Preemptive retaliatory strike. That sounds like what Mike Johnson was saying. But they attacked 3 embassies, right? So they did that long after you bombed them to smithereens. So anyway, the judge, when they appealed to the judge, if you saw that, that was Bolton who was there. No, it's not war. No, it's whatever we want it to be. So the U.S. Senate rejected a war powers resolution, and Iran is now saying that it hit a U.S. warship with missiles 600 kilometers away in northern Indian Ocean. The Houthis in Yemen are planning to attack vital targets inside Saudi Arabia. Meanwhile, Kurdish forces in Iraq have launched a ground military offensive into Iran against the Iranian government. And these are just a couple of the issues of what has really been ignited into a regional total war. Pretty much all the Gulf states are involved in one way or the other. That's what Donald Trump has done. He set the Gulf states, the Middle East, on fire. No question about it. And I guess this is working out pretty well for the vision of Huckabee that the entire Middle East should belong to Israel. I guess we will see the entire Gaza playbook enacted here until they can take that over. But I've got some questions here and comments before we move on. Junk Silver says, David, you know, this isn't just about Trump. The guy won't even blow his nose without permission from his handlers. We're intended to think that this is all about one crazy guy, but it isn't. Absolutely. I mean, this is, as we just saw with this thing, this has been the deep state. This is making the deep state deeper, which is the CIA, as a matter of fact. Over the weekend, I heard this interview with a guy. One of them was Pablo Escobar, who is anti-war, and the other one was an Iranian guy. They were being interviewed and asked questions about what was going on in Iran. I thought it was very interesting because the Iranian guy was so dyed-in-the-wool anti-American, but the reasons are very clear. It's what I've been saying. What they don't talk about, they talk about, oh, the Islamic Republic has been at war with us for 50 years or whatever, right? Well, 47. The bottom line is that it started a long time before that. We preemptively attacked Iran when we overthrew their elected government in 1953, 73 years ago. And then we put in our own dictator. And the people who did that was the CIA. And then the CIA government consisted of this puppet king, the Shah, and his CIA Mossad-trained secret police who had a brutal regime. And so that's what this guy was saying. He said, you know, I teach in the universities in Tehran, and the younger people just didn't understand what I was telling them about America. They couldn't believe it was that bad. He said, now they see it, right? If you wanted to have regime change in Iran, you just sit back and let the people react to the totalitarian ayatollahs, which is already starting. And so what Trump has done, if he wants regime change, he has snatched defeat out of the jaws of victory. Because now people are seeing this guy who is a hardcore pro-Khomeini Ayatollah guy, right? They see that what he was saying about America all along was true in terms of its interaction with Iran. And you start bombing the civilian population, that always galvanizes opinion against you. Started doing that in World War II. As I said many times, Hitler thought that he was going to demoralize Britain. Instead, what he did was he gave them a reason to fight harder. And the same thing is happening right now in Iran. That is the ultimate blowback against these policies. And yet it's the same people that keep doing this. You're right. It's the CIA that actually runs our government, runs our foreign policy that's doing it. And of course, it also is Israel. You had a situation where the Trump administration, somebody that got a secret message from the Iranians saying we would like to talk. And the Israelis were spying on America's secret stuff. And then Netanyahu called Trump on the carpet about it. And he said, I'm not interested in talking to them. I mean, he's also controlled by a foreign government, not just by a government inside our own government, the CIA. Everything that they do is foreign to the Constitution and foreign to American values and American interests. But he's also the tool of a foreign government as well. Marky Mark, thank you for the tip. He says that the daylight savings time started in World War I as a fuel-saving measure instituted by Woodrow Wilson. Yeah. Another thing we can put on his rap sheet of crimes. Federal Reserve, the income tax, World War I, daylight savings time. This guy still cursing us from the grave. It's amazing. DG8, thank you for the tip. He says, David, can I ask a question? How does $4 to $6 a gallon gas help the Republicans keep the House and Senate in November? Yeah, I don't know if that is the what he wants to do or not. Of course, we all saw the stuff from Biden, right? The stickers. I did that, remember that? Well, here's Trump's version that's going to be coming out. I did that. And he's pointing to the $3.45 gas, which is about where we are right now in terms of the average around the United States. It's jumped up tremendously. He's pointing to that with one particular finger, and it's not the index finger. It is Donald Trump giving us the finger. Stealth Patriot, thank you for the tip. I appreciate that. He says, same way the U.S. will never have any country in their right mind negotiate with them again. Why would anybody invest their money? It's just there for the taking. That's right. When you see the treachery, he was talking about BlackRock and Blackstone and these others they're doing this now. They're blocking people taking their money out. Yeah, that's not going to work out too well for them. But they've already set up this trap inside of these things to allow them to legally do that. That's what the bad part of this is, that they surreptitiously put this in, but it is not trustworthy as well. So if you don't have money in there, don't put any more in, and you might want to start thinking about getting it out. Tornado, thank you for the tip. He says, happy Monday to the Knight family and everyone in the chat. So sick of daylight savings time. Yes, me too. I'm very tired today. You can probably hear it in my voice. After the stroke, once I start to get tired, I start slurring my speech. I'm really fighting it today, having a difficult time even talking. He said, I posted a meme I made on your X. I think you might find it funny. I'll have to check it out. DG8 says, David, as long as MAGA uses the left as the barometer to judge Trump, we are screwed. Choosing between the lesser of two evils always ensures evil, right? Ensures losing, he says. As Christians, why would we ever choose evil? I agree. As a matter of fact, I heard that all the time with the Libertarian Party because as a third party, they got really tired of the lesser of two evil statement. They heard it all the time. Funny that I don't hear that from Christians, right? The Libertarian Party would always say, well, lesser of two evils is still evil. Why are you picking that? I don't hear that from Christians. That's exactly right. So let's take a look at the oil issue as well and how this is going to affect things. I said from the very beginning, this is going to be bigger than the OPEC embargo of 1973. And anybody who was alive at that point in time understands that. And there were aftershocks of that went on for quite some time. The inflation, the rapid inflation that we had in the 70s and the stagflation, all the rest of this stuff, the direct consequence of that. And by the way, what happened to gold at that point in time? That was its previous record high. Donald Trump is good for gold. He's not good for anything else, but he's good for gold. Oil has surged 35% this week. Biggest gain in futures trading. Actually, it's more than that now because that's talking about the price of gasoline. And now, as of this morning, as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, a barrel of oil is now over $100 per gallon as of this morning. And it was back in the 70s or high 60s just a week ago. Rapidly going up. U.S. crude soared 35.6%, biggest weekly gain in the history of the futures contract, dating back to 1983. Brent jumped about 28% for the biggest weekly gain since April of 2020. And that's not the end of it. We have other markets that are doing much worse. Diesel is up 57%, diesel fuel. And that's something that is really going to just permeate through the supply chain and create massive inflation for everybody. And jet fuel is up even higher than that. So you're starting to see the cost of plane tickets skyrocketing. Even if you're going to be able to fly, if they don't shut the airports down, it's going to be very difficult to do it. We just had my daughter, who's still in Austin, got tickets for her family to see us in a couple of months. And Karen contacted her and said, they were already talking about coming. She said, get your tickets now. They're going to go way up. She contacted us after they got the tickets 2 days later. She said the prices have jumped $100 per ticket. And we look at my mother-in-law, she's 93 years old. Karen has got some tickets over the weekend to try to bring her up here to see the family and go with her. And as she is on the phone trying to get the tickets, they're rapidly going up. It's incredible what we're seeing here now, the way the inflation is happening. A prolonged war could wreak havoc on global oil and gas market. And we know what that looks like. We've done this before. The thing that bothers me about all this stuff is that Trump can't possibly be this stupid, or even the people around him. It has to be intentional. Because, and it's kind of what I said about Trump when he was saying, remember back in 2019, you had several states that were trampling on people's individual right of informed consent about the vaccines and trampling on the rights of parents because they did not want to have their kids vaccinated because of religious or because of medical reasons. And Trump came out and said, they got to get it. It's really going around. It's really going around. They got to get the shots, He was already in on this thing. And he was laying the groundwork for that with that measles stuff, laying the groundwork for COVID. That was part of the preparation, right? The predictive programming. And I said at the time, how dare him say that? I mean, this is a guy who is a decade older than me, and he knows, we didn't even have measles vaccines back then, and everybody had measles, and it wasn't a life-threatening thing. It was, people would have complications like they do with anything. You can get a cold, and you can die from complications from a cold. But that doesn't mean that you got to vaccinate everybody for the flu shot, as if that even made any difference, which it doesn't. And so I said, how dare him? He's seen that. Well, how dare him? He's seen the OPEC oil embargo, and so have all the people around him. They're old enough to remember that. Why would they do that? The guy is a one-man OPEC. The guy is a one-man fourth turning, as I tweeted out. I said, he is, everything that he's done is about creating global chaos and financial issues globally. And that goes hand in hand with a global war. They always do. That's what happens with fourth turnings. It's economic chaos followed by war. And this is going to be global. Qatar's energy minister said that crude prices could reach $150 per barrel in the coming weeks if oil tankers were unable to pass through the Strait of Hormuz. Well, the Trump administration has gone from saying it's going to be 4 to 5 weeks to now Hegseth is saying 8 weeks. And now anti-war says that sources have told Politico that they're making plans to take this out to September at least. Meanwhile, you've had other people saying that 25 days is the max that we've got before we have absolute chaos globally because of restriction of energy and inflation of energy prices. Even in their earliest scenario of 4 to 5 weeks, they are beyond the point of global chaos. So think about what they're planning on doing. He said, this could bring down the economies of the world, said Qatar's energy minister. The Trump administration on Friday, Trump regime, it's not administration, it's a regime, announced a $20 billion insurance program for oil tankers. They announced that they would be escorting ships, and then that was taken back because the Navy said, we can't do that. It's too dangerous. We're going to have to bomb Iran a lot more, and deprecate their resources quite a bit more before we even put our ships into those straits, literally. Iraq has shut down 1.5 million barrels per day of production, two Iraqi officials told Reuters. Kuwait has also started cutting production after running out of storage space. The market is shifting from pricing pure geopolitical risk to grappling with tangible operational disruption, they said. And here's the issue. There's an excellent piece from a guy who is the economics editor for Sky News, and it was published by the Times of London. And he had visited this the Saudi Arabian liquid petroleum gas facility, the gigantic one. I want to say Razgul, but something like that. Razgul's the villain from Batman. Yeah. It's something like that, but the name of it. But he said he visited this place once before, and he goes, it's just this massive sea of metal pipes that you get lost in. And that was hit by the Iranians pretty early on. It's now shut down. And the consequences of that are massive, especially for Europe, because they have moved over to using gas, and the way they get the gas is liquid petroleum. So that facility, what that facility does is convert the gas to liquid so they can transport it on the tankers. Now that has had a double whammy. Not only can the tankers not get there, but it can't be produced in the first place. And this is the kind of thing that's going to make this last a lot longer. Even if the hostilities stopped today and they started letting traffic go through the Strait of Hormuz, the damage that's already been done to infrastructure like that is going to take quite a while to recover. And if these different countries, Kuwait has shut it down, and many others are saying, well, we don't have any more places where we can put the oil. So we're going to have to shut down the wells, perhaps. The alternative is to just start pouring the crude oil out into the ocean, which is going to be an environmental disaster. But if they shut down these wells, it's very difficult to get them reopened, and many times it damages them severely. And so the question is, what are they going to do? I mean, they're caught between a rock and Iran is where they're caught, right? Not just a hard place. But the average price for a gallon of gasoline jumped by nearly 27 cents in the last week to $3.25, but now it is just under $3.50. As I pointed out, Trump did that. That's what you need to put on these on these different ones. So the U.S. entered its seventh day on this war entered its seventh day on Friday. Hegseth is boasting, so we've only just begun to fight. Well, that was kind of an honorable thing when it was in the context of when John Paul Jones said it, but not in the context of what he is saying here. He loves to talk about how we're not fighting fair, and that was the plan, and all the rest of the stuff. The guy, a lot of people are starting to use the phrase here, reveling in the carnage. It is disgusting to watch War Pete on his speeches. So it's Trump's lethality, right? War Pete is obsessed with lethality. He hates legality. He doesn't want any rules about how you can fight war. When in reality, the rules are there to try to minimize the carnage and to try to protect American troops. If you're just going to machine gun people, like the Germans did to the prisoners of the Great Escape, they're going to do that to your soldiers as well. So those rules are there, War Pete, to protect American soldiers as well as everybody else. When you violate the Geneva Convention, you're putting your own people at risk. You are inviting savagery, not civilization. Iran is hoping that we can't sustain this, he said, which is a really bad miscalculation. Oh, he can rain down death from the skies indefinitely. Well, again, gas hits the highest average price since the fall of 2024. And here they're saying, first that article said $3.25. This one's saying $3.32. It was at $3.49 on Sunday was average price. Gasoline, which reached a peak of over $6 a gallon to some states under my predecessor, said Trump. It was quite honestly a disaster, he said. It's now below $2.30 a gallon in most states. He was bragging about this at the State of the Union. Now what is he doing? He said, when I visited the great state of Iowa just a few weeks ago, I saw even $1.85 a gallon for gasoline. Well, it is a disaster, and it is a uniparty disaster. And it's the people who are the real power behind the throne. The last time the national average made a similar weekly jump was back in March of 2022 during the start of the Russian-Ukraine conflict. And that was in response to Biden's moves. And what did Biden's moves do? Did it really hurt Russia? No. Russia gained from that. They actually got a windfall profit. They put on the sanctions. The sanctions were not very effective. But what the sanctions did was to raise the price of oil so that Russia could give a huge discount to people if they paid in gold. And so it was a big windfall, about $300 billion for the Russians and all that. That's how these government policies are backfiring on us constantly. Diesel prices climbing even faster than gasoline prices. Much of the world's economy, of course, from consumer goods to the food that you eat, gets to you thanks to diesel. And not only that, but it's something that is used by farmers. This is the time of year where they're planting crops, and so farmers are seeing the diesel fuel costs go sky high. Then all the transportation costs, and it's not just food, it's everything. It's not just gasoline. Since the fighting started in Iran a week ago, gas prices are up 47%. Diesel is up 47%. Gasoline is up 35%. And they said diesel is rising so much faster than gasoline because it was in a short supply already, heading into the energy price shock from Trump, said an independent oil analyst. He didn't say from Trump. I give Trump the credit for what the Trump regime wants to do. An advisor to the global oil company Gulf Oil, he predicts diesel could hit $5 a gallon this month. For smaller trucking companies, a diesel spike can be catastrophic. A Chicago-based trucking business that was formed about 3 years ago, the guy says, I've seen diesel prices fluctuate but never spike like that. This is really bad. He said he may have to raise his rates soon to offset the cost, but the larger trucking companies are already doing that and adding fuel surcharges like UPS is doing. So you can see the price of everything go up. Pretty much everything that you have, because of our distributed supply chains, and they're distributed even in the United States, everything is going to be affected by this. It's like a value-added tax being added, just like his tariffs are a tax. Container shipping companies and other cargo carriers, which run on fuel similar to diesel, have also started to impose fuel surcharges. And so, coming soon, folks, 1970s stagflation. Except probably worse on both the stagnant side and the inflation side. The cost of plane tickets, as they point out, likely to soar soon. But I told you just a moment ago how we've seen that in our family immediately. So gasoline up 35%, diesel 47%, jet fuel up 56%. And you're starting to see the price. This is if you look at the price of a barrel of oil, we've seen even more than that. And that's going to keep propagating through the system and all these other derivatives that come from it. Airlines already face a loss of revenue from canceled or diverted flights across the Middle East amid the war. Larger airlines like United are more able to cope with this than the smaller ones. Meanwhile, Kuwait has cut their oil output, as I said before. Qatar warns that the Strait of Hormuz choke point chaos risk global shock. So this is the Hobson's choice that they're faced with. What do we do with this? We can't shut our production down all the way. So they're trying to slow it down without completely blocking off the oil wells. So I thought the graphic that Zero Hedge had was perfect. They have this massive wall of flames in the background. That looks something like this. This is the reality, folks. Look at that. That is Tehran. That is an oil storage or production facility, I don't know which, that was bombed. But when this was put up and a guy was reporting on it in the Persian language, you had all these people saying, this can't be real. This has got to be AI. Because it's just this massive billowing wall of fire that you see there. And so they had already put that up as an AI thing, and they had a ship, and everything was, on this graphic that they've got at Zero Hedge, this massive wall of fire in the background. In the front is a black swan that is swimming. And that's exactly what this is, a black swan event. So they said, even if a resolution emerges in the near term, restarting the crude fields, refineries, and export hubs would likely take at least a month and possibly longer, ignoring the damage that could be done to them as well. So, as I said before, Qatar's energy minister said $150 a barrel is coming soon, and it may be sooner than you think. Just like when people were predicting the price of gold, we could see the causes of gold going up, but most people were surprised at how rapidly it went up. When you look at the projections for the big banks, there were commodity groups that were looking at it when they were telling people, well, we think we're going to see $4,500 per ounce gold by the end of this last year. Instead, what you saw was $5,000. And we've consistently seen them underestimate the volatility of all markets, whether it's gold or the price of oil during this war. They're underestimating the volatility. This will bring down the economies of the world, he warned. This war continues for a few weeks. GDP growth around the world will be impacted. Everybody's energy price is going to go higher. There will be shortages of some products, and there will be a chain reaction of factories that cannot supply. This is yet another one of the attacks on the supply chain that the Trump administration has been famous for. And again, as the listener pointed out, it's not simply the directions of Donald Trump, but they put him there because he's the guy that can pull it off. Because the people who normally would oppose this go along with it if they've got Donald Trump out there as a facade. And everybody perceives it as him playing ego politics instead of geopolitics. On Tuesday, the Zero Hedge had talked about the number of days of disruption needed in the Gulf area that would trigger actual panic. And they said, turns out, as they went through in that article and detailed it, the number was 25 days. And remember that that's not even the shortest scenario of the Pentagon, 25 days. So we really are looking at energy panic around the world coming. Our main scenario is that if this lasts for 4 weeks, things will be completely out of control. This is a guy who is spokesperson. Let's see, his trying to find this guy's name. He's Al-Haji, but I don't know what his title is. Nevertheless, he's with one of these Arab states. He says, when I say out of control, I mean that even if China starts releasing oil from its inventories, the problem is that my guess is China would also restrict exports, which means that oil would remain in China. He says there may be something much larger at play, with Iran serving more as a trigger for a broader strategic objective. Perhaps that broader strategic objective is the fourth turning. Some people have pointed out that perhaps this is a play to give the U.S. something of a monopoly on the energy industry. And certainly a case could be made for that when you look at Trump's targets of Venezuela and Iran. And when you look at what happened with the Nord Stream pipelines, remember the Nord Stream pipelines, that was the two countries that are going to benefit probably the most from this energy crisis this time around are going to be the U.S. and Russia. And Russia is a big provider of oil and natural gas, and the panic is getting so bad that Scott Bessent is saying that we're going to relax the sanctions on Russian oil.
The Indians had been very good actors. We had asked them to stop buying sanctioned Russian oil this fall. They did. They were going to substitute it with U.S. oil, but to ease the temporary gap of oil around the world, we have given them permission to accept the Russian oil. We may unsanction other Russian oil. You know, the other thing Treasury can do here, Larry, is there are hundreds of millions of sanctioned barrels of sanctioned crude on the water, and in essence, by unsanctioning them, Treasury can create supply. And we are looking at that. We're going to keep a cadence of announcing measures to bring relief to the market during this conflict. And Larry,
in other words, we can make things legal and we can make them illegal. I mean, who gave them the right to do any of that stuff? And that's another example of the deliberate chaos. And we go back and we look at the Syrian situation. You look at the Syrian war that was there for the longest time. That was largely a fight between two pipelines. So you had a U.S. ally, Gulf state ally, I think it was Kuwait, that wanted to put a pipeline across Syria, but Syria wanted a pipeline from Russia going across them to the U.S., to Europe and so forth. And so you had the situation with the Nord Stream pipeline. That was gas that was coming in from Russia to Germany, and Europe and Germany were getting a lot of Russian gas, and the U.S. did not want that. They wanted them to buy liquid natural gas from American producers at a higher price. And so that was a big part of what was going on with that blowing up those pipelines. So we've seen this over and over again. So that may be a bigger issue that is involved here. But I think a lot of this has to do with the fact these people need to feed this fourth turning because they want to overturn the order of the world as it is right now. It's foundational to their new world order. They need to have a global depression and a global war. That is the fundamental thing, I think. And as a part of that, you've got the U.S. eyeing a hegemony on oil and petroleum products, but they can't even handle all the business. And so they are going to release this somewhat for the Russians to be able to do a little bit more business to keep things from completely melting down. On Thursday, with Reuters, Trump was nonchalant about the rising prices. He said, hey, if they rise, they rise. Yeah, again, this is the bottom line. He doesn't really care, right? As a matter of fact, when we look at Trump, he has been of two minds on all this stuff, hasn't he?
You're right now not in a very good position.
You're gambling with the lives of millions of people.
You're gambling with World War III. You're gambling with World War III. For the American people to see what's going on.
That's Trump debating himself right there, just like he debated Zelensky in the White House. Is this the beginning of the worst gas crisis the world has ever seen? Again, this is the article I was talking about before from the economics editor of Sky News, and this is an article carried by the London Times. The closure of Rosslafan, that was the one I couldn't remember. I was thinking Rosgul. The energy complex could cripple economies, send prices soaring, and halt oil supplies, along with what is happening at the Strait of Hormuz. And that is literally what is going on. So when you look at the impact of this, and he takes this out, he says, when Russia invaded Ukraine and Europe pledged to wean itself off of Russian methane, it turned primarily to shipments of liquefied gas coming from overseas, coming from the U.S. and also from Gulf. The shutdown of this facility in Saudi Arabia, Rosslafan, has thrown that entire market into turmoil. Other countries are even more exposed. The vast majority of Qatari gas has been loaded onto tankers and shipped to Asia. Nearly 40% of Taiwan's power comes from imported gas. So you just shut down 40% of Taiwan, which is a lot of the state-of-the-art silicon chips come from there now as well, which feeds the plants that enable the manufacture of the world's most advanced computer chips. Pakistan, Bangladesh have no strategic reserves. South Korea reportedly has only enough natural gas to last for 9 days. But again, the earliest scenario of the Trump regime is 4 to 5 weeks. Now they've extended that. Even though if it was stopped today, the damage that's been done is going to take a while to unwind. The longer it goes, the longer it's going to take to get this thing fixed because they constantly are destroying things. European politicians, having barely recovered from the last energy price shock, are now staring down the barrel of something very similar. British wholesale gas prices doubled last week, a jump that could prefigure a sharp rise in utility bills. The precise scale of the rise is hard to predict, but it's likely to stretch into hundreds of pounds on the average bill. This is going to be ruinous to individual households. Bills, though, are just the start of it. If there was one lesson from the post-2022 energy crisis, it was that higher gas prices trickle into nearly every part of the economy. Higher food prices, higher haircut prices, higher steel prices. The Bank of England is likely to ditch its plans to cut interest rates for the coming months, or at least that is what investors are assuming. About the only thing that you can do in the face of this coming wave of inflation, I think, is to play gold. It's one of the safest things you can do, especially when we look at what happened with a very, very similar thing with the OPEC oil embargo. Those living in the Gulf have two fronts to worry about. The first problem is that of the oil producers, especially countries like Iraq and Kuwait. They're not equipped for the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. Again, they're the ones who are running out of storage space. They're trying to cut production. But if they shut down these wells, it's going to be damaging and very difficult to get them started. Could possibly permanently damage their oil reservoirs, he said. The other option is to just start emptying it into the land or the sea or burning it off. An environmental disaster of monumental proportions. The second problem gets to the heart of the 21st century Gulf. It's an economy that was attempting to pivot away from oil and gas and towards services. And so they brought in a lot of people from abroad. 77% of those living in Qatar are non-native. The analogous figures are 74% in the UAE, 67% in Kuwait, 52% in Bahrain, according to the World Bank data. Others put the proportions even higher. And so those people are going to go home, or if they are higher paid jobs, if they are lower level workers, what are they going to do when the economy goes south? Are they going to have to deal with unrest and crime in their states because of that as well? All this is before you get to the rather more terrifying questions. What happens if and when Iran begins targeting things like desalination plants? Which, by the way, they did right after this guy wrote this article. They hit a major desalination plant in Bahrain, and as they points out, that provides most of the water for the region, these desalination plants. So again, it is a wider war against all the infrastructure that's happening there, and it's going to take quite some time to undo all this, even if they were to start tomorrow. So if the war was short-lived and straits opened in a few weeks, the impact might be manageable. But he said we'll still have an unpleasant wave of inflation. But even a few weeks might be too long for the Gulf nations, the petrostates whose infrastructure was never built to accommodate a catastrophe of this kind. The main beneficiaries, on the other hand, are countries outside that can sell their oil and gas into this new lucrative market, mainly Russia and, yes, America. America has become the world's largest LNG exporter, liquid natural gas, and it stands to make a killing, and not just with bombs. And so this is going to be the spin that you're going to see from the MAGA people, as if this is something good or wise. It's not. This is just another fallacy of another variation of the broken window fallacy. You're going to start a global war and a global depression just so that we can monopolize the energy markets? Is that a good trade-off? The big winner from the Persian Gulf energy crisis, of course, is also going to be Russia. A massive change of fortune for Putin, but he already did pretty well with Biden's sanctions. So are vessels starting to identify as Chinese in order to transit the Hormuz choke point? And so we're helping Russia. We're helping China. We've already had a couple of cases of, there's been at least one tanker that's been attacked by drones, but you've had only, I think, 2 tankers go through the Strait of Hormuz, and because they're associated with China. They start broadcasting, all Chinese owned, all Chinese crew, leave us, let us go through. And so everybody else has got to try to make run the gauntlet of drones and missiles that are there. and the U.S. government can't do anything to protect them. They can hope that they can deprecate the Iranian military to the extent, and they said it's going to take weeks to do that, deprecate their military to the extent that they don't have the capability to fire at ships that are there. But as long as they do, the U.S. Navy can't operate under that circumstance without great risk. And, of course, there's a lot of drones that are being sent as they swarm. Chinese ships will have a monopoly on the Strait of Hormuz trade route. And Russia is going to be selling lots and lots of oil. So is this a good geopolitical strategy? The Gulf states need food and other supplies, and it all will depend on some kind of a slow boat from China. That is the reality of what we're looking at, folks. Truly amazing what Trump has done. It is boneheaded, stupid, regardless of who's running the Trump regime, because we've seen the CIA and all their wars fail over and over again, and this is going to be yet another one to put in that category. You can bank on it. We'll be right back.
Making sense common again. You're listening to The David Knight Show.
If you like the Eagles,
On a dark desert highway,
the Cars, and Huey Lewis in the News,
they say the heart of rock and roll is still beating.
you'll love the Classic Hits channel at APS Radio. Download our app or listen now at apsradio.com.
I can't tell you if the use of force in Iraq today would last 5 days or 5 weeks or 5 months, but it certainly isn't going to last any longer than that.
President Trump has all the latitude in the world to talk about how long it may or may not take. 4 weeks, 2 weeks, 6 weeks. It could move up. It could move back.
Yeah, it's looking just like Iraq, as I said. It's Iraq deja vu. Lies about starting the war, the basis for starting the war. And then, of course, we see this mission creep, or I should say creeps on a mission is really more appropriate, what we're seeing here. And one of the worst creeps is Pete Hegseth, War Pete. So one person said he's a very dangerous person. He's reveling in the carnage of the Iraq war, of the Iran war. Brash, bombastic, and out of his depth. Fox News host. Brash, bellicose, he sounded more like a cartoon bully than a somber statesman. Death and destruction from the sky all day long. He wears a red, white, and blue tie and pocket square. Says, this was never meant to be a fair fight. It's not a fair fight. We are punching them while they're down. And that's exactly how it should be. People like that, folks, are cowards, fundamentally. And I just got to say, when I look at Pete Hegseth, don't call him a Christian nationalist. Call him a nationalist if you have to. Don't call him a Christian nationalist. There is nothing Christian about these actions. He is a reproach to the name of Christ. 45-year-old former Fox News TV host, now commander of the most powerful military But this week became the face of Trump's war in Iran. He's rapidly transformed the Pentagon into a staging ground for an ideological and religious crusade, writes The Guardian. With machismo, Christian nationalism, and callousness toward the lives of U.S. troops. So there's nothing Christian about that. The Christian values gave us the just war theory, saying the only reason you fight wars is to try to preserve more, protect people from greater slaughter. The same reason that you'd have police go in into a school shooting, right, trying to stop it. That's the reality. You don't start wars. And you don't revel in how many people you can kill, especially in civilians. And you don't try to extend them indefinitely. You have a purpose, and that is to stop the war. But his purpose is to keep it going. So, as I point out, he is one. They got comments from one person who is with the Vet Voice Foundation, a nonprofit advocacy organization, said Pete Hegseth is a very dangerous person. He has the arsenal of the U.S. government at his disposal, and he's got a permission slip from Trump to deploy carnage wherever he wants, against whomever he wishes. And so they talk about where he came from. Of course, he studied politics at Princeton University, and there he became publisher and editor of the Princeton Tory, a conservative student journal, which basically focused on culture war issues. After leaving Princeton, he joined the U.S. Army National Guard as an infantry officer. He had deployments to Gitmo, Cuba, and also tours of Iran, of Iraq, and Afghanistan. I'm getting those two countries mixed up constantly. I guess I can be forgiven since the administration seems to get them mixed up. Hegseth became chief executive of Concerned Veterans for America, a conservative advocacy group, but he departed in 2016 amid allegations of financial mismanagement, sexual impropriety, and personal misconduct. And in 2018, his mother wrote the famous letter that went back and forth during his confirmation hearings and said, "You are an abuser of women. I have no respect for anybody that does something like that." This is a mother writing to her son. He once wrote that in the event of a Democrat election win, he said the military and the police will be forced to make a choice. Yes, there will be some form of civil war. So he's ready for a civil war here as well as wars everywhere else. Like I've said so many times, this fourth turning will most likely be a combination of the three previous fourth turnings we've had in America: the Revolutionary War, the Civil War, and World War as well. His record of allegations that he drank while on duty has troubled tenure running two small veterans nonprofit organizations and his lack of experience for a post overseeing the world's most powerful military. The Senate ultimately split 50-50 on confirming him. They needed the tiebreaker of J.D. Vance to come in and vote. Hegseth has vowed to unleash, quote, overwhelming and punishing violence on enemies and promised to dispense with stupid rules of engagement, quote unquote, is what he calls it. And these are rules that were designed to restrict attacks on civilian populations. But not only that, but these are rules that are designed to not have people murdered that are shipwrecked. These are rules from the Pentagon. They're there for a reason, because that's what the Nazis did when the U-boat commanders would sink a ship. Then they would go back and kill all the people who were trying to survive. It's a heinous crime. This guy is reveling in it. Hegseth has largely foregone the solemnity of traditional defense secretary in favor of a performative antics of a partisan broadcaster reveling in America's capacity to inflict violence. For years, he's cultivated a hyper-masculine muscle man aesthetic. Now he's faced with a geopolitical crisis that demands nuance and strategic foresight. He appears to many people to be out of his depth. I wish I could say how cavalier, obtuse, and hopeless Hegseth is at leading the Pentagon, said a Marine Corps veteran. He says, I can't even muster the words to describe his self-adulation, matched only in scope by his apparent moral depravity. I would say the same thing is true of Trump. No wonder the two of them are joining forces. They don't need a bumper sticker. They don't need the bravado and the brashness that he brings. During his Pentagon briefing on the war on Wednesday, He adopted a bombastic tone, saying of the Iranian leaders, they are toast and they know it. Or at least soon enough they will know it. America is winning decisively, devastatingly, and without mercy. He bashed fake news while addressing the 6 Army reservists killed in an Iranian attack on operations in Kuwait. He said, when a few drones get through or a tragic thing happens, it's front page news. I get it. The press only wants to make the president look bad. But try for once to report on the reality. The terms of this war will be set by us at every step. You know, by the way, when you talk about the 6 people that were were killed, when they bring them back on the plane and people come to meet them, it's called the dignified transfer. Trump showed up to show that he was concerned about them, and yet he showed up with his one of his ball caps on, you know, promoting himself or his MAGA or something like that, and he left that on. And a lot of people said, take off the hat. It's called a dignified transfer because you're supposed to show respect. But I think one of the most interesting things was that if you think that is being overly critical, what Fox News did was they aired footage that was of a previous dignified transfer. So as they're talking about Trump showing up, they are showing footage from a couple of years ago, you know, previous administration or something, where he showed up and he was not wearing a ball cap. So they understood how that was going to play, and they went in the other direction. And then, of course, there's the fact that he is loyal only to Trump. And even to the extent, as he pushes down on that, he says, it's outrageous you have a national effort by all the media, regardless of partisan bent, to memorialize and honor the dead, and he sees that simply as a tactic to bring down Trump. Well, of course, Fox News did just the opposite. They covered for him. And it's his loyalty solely to Trump that is one of the scariest things about Hegseth, even to the extent that it takes precedence over his sympathy and respect for the fallen soldiers. You look at the tattoos that he's got the Jerusalem cross, and he's got another one that has a Latin phrase, Deus vult, which means God wills it. Well, no, God does not will this. God does not will what he is involved in. As a matter of fact, God wills just the opposite. You might want to read the Bible rather than his tattoo.
It is actually pronounced Deus vult.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Did I say Deus? I'm not having a good day today either. Yeah, Deus, not Zeus. Anyway, in his 2020 book,
he might like Zeus a little bit more. All the philandering and the killing, and
he seems to be a Zeus follower, I think, instead of a Deus. In his 2020 book, American Crusade, he wrote, those who benefit from Western civilization should think a crusader. He suggests Democrat politics alone may not suffice to achieve the goals of his political allies, I should say, Democratic. He says, we don't want to fight, but like our fellow Christians 1,000 years ago, we must. Well, that is where this guy is trying to take us here. Again, he attends Pilgrim Hill Reformed Fellowship, a church that is linked to the Communion of Reformed Evangelical Churches, co-founded by Doug Wilson. They need to stand up to this guy. They need to tell him what's right and wrong, because obviously he doesn't know. He's another one of these celebrity Christian recruits that then become the face of Christianity when they don't really know what's happening. Gard Goldsmith says Trump and Besant are counting on the UK, EU, and Germany debasing their currencies even more to let Trump and the Fed lower U.S. rates, water down the U.S. currency as well. Yeah, it is across the board. We're looking at total economic chaos that's here. So Hegseth's own version of Christianity is one that's built around a certain Christian advancement that comes through domination of governments of nations. He believes that not only is the military at his disposal for this purpose, but it's there to fulfill God's agenda for the world. And that's a sad thing when you look at it. A lot of bad theology is driving Christians at this point in time to become kind of nihilistic and apocalyptic, very much like Muslims, for example. That is not Christianity, folks. That is a bastardized version of Christianity, if ever there was one. Hegseth was mocking Iranians that think they're going to live. There was a, well, I don't have time for it, but they accused him of, they accused the BBC of saying that Hegseth wanted to kill the Iranian people and rain death down on them when he said the Iranian regime. And yet you have people like Lindsey Graham actually saying the Iranian people. They don't make a distinction. And quite frankly, neither does Hegseth if he's going to bomb civilian populations as primary targets. That's all the time we've got for today. We'll continue with this as things develop tomorrow. Thank you for joining us. The common man. They created Common Core to dumb down our children. They created Common Pass to track and control us. Their Commons Project to make sure the commoners own nothing. And the communist future. They see the common man as simple, unsophisticated, ordinary. But each of us has worth and dignity created in the image of God. That is what we have in common. That is what they want to take away. Their most powerful weapons are isolation, deception, intimidation. They desire to know everything about us while they hide everything from us. It's time to turn that around and expose what they want to hide. Please share the information and links you'll find at thedavidknightshow.com. Thank you for listening. Thank you for sharing. If you can't support us financially, please keep us in your prayers. thedavidknightshow.com.